I've always been good friends with one of my cousins. We'll call him Cole, and he's the same age as me. The two of us were not quite inseparable, but we always did get along very well. We were often found together, both in school and outside of it. We'd always wound up in the same class throughout elementary school, so he was always around. When we were 12 and in the 6th grade, I was hanging out with Cole on a Friday afternoon. It was the later part of May, and we were psyched at the start of the weekend. We'd wound up at his house, since he didn't live too far from me, and at one point, my mom called to say that our grandpa was in the hospital. While the issue with our grandpa wasn't expected to be life-threatening, he was being kept at the hospital overnight for observation. Both my parents and Cole's were planning on staying with him and our grandma at the hospital. That's because my mom and her sister were the two of their siblings, who lived close by. I was told that I was given the okay to stay at Cole's house for the night. Cole's 15-year-old brother, who we'll call Hunter, would be in charge while our parents were out. That was fine by us. I got along well enough with Hunter, and he was never the bossy older brother/cousin that some of my other friends said they had to put up with. We ordered pizza and enjoyed goofing off as boys that age tend to do. At around 9, there was a knock at the front door, and Cole went to answer it. I was a bit curious about who it could be at that time of the night, and I watched from a ways back. At the door were two older guys. They said they were with the city, and that they were investigating reports about the water pressure supposedly being bad in the neighborhood. They asked Cole if his parents were home, and when Cole said they were unavailable at that moment, the guys started asking a bunch of questions about how the water pressure was in the house. Then they asked if they could come inside to check. Hunter came over at that point and politely told the guys that the water pressure was fine, and perhaps they should move on to check on other homes in the neighborhood. The guys seemed reluctant to leave, but turned and walked away after Hunter started closing the door. After the door was shut, we looked at each other and shrugged, but didn't think too much of it. Then we went back to goofing off. Eventually, we decided to go to bed. Cole and Hunter shared a bedroom, and we all agreed that I'd sleep in there with them, rather than sleeping on the couch or something like that. That way we could talk while we fell asleep, and Hunter grabbed a sleeping bag out of their camping supplies for me. When we got into their bedroom, they stripped down to their briefs, and I remembered Cole mentioned to me once a while back that they started sleeping in just their underwear. Since I hadn't originally planned on staying the night, I hadn't brought anything with me from home as far as overnight stuff. Since I wasn't in the mood to sleep in my clothes, I stripped down to my briefs as well, even though I felt a bit embarrassed. We were all guys though, and I knew they wouldn't say anything or be judgmental. They climbed into their beds, and I quickly crawled into the sleeping bag, and after talking for a while about random stuff, we eventually fell asleep. Early the next morning, I got up because I had to pee, so I quietly got out of the sleeping bag and went to the bathroom. On the way back to the bedroom, I heard something in the family room, which was on the opposite end of the house. I didn't pay too much attention to it at the time, because I was thinking it must be either Cole or Hunter. But then I got back into the bedroom and realized that both of them were still in there. Trying not to panic, I woke them and told them that I thought someone was in the house. They quietly followed me, and the moment we walked into the family room, we saw the two guys from the night before. It was rather clear that they were robbing the place. One of them started moving towards us, and he pulled out a wicked-looking knife. The three of us promptly raced to the front door, somehow managed to get it unlocked and open, and we fled outside. As luck would have it, a cop was driving by at that particular moment. We quickly flagged him down and told him about the two guys in the house. The cop called for backup, and within a couple of minutes, several other cops were there, and they proceeded to enter the house. Then after some searching, they caught the two guys. The cops figured out that the two guys must have entered from a window in the laundry room that had a broken latch. They probably targeted that house, because while it wasn't empty, they'd probably realized that there were no adults there. They must have figured that if we discovered them, we could be more easily dealt with than adults. To add insult to injury, when we were waiting outside while the cops searched the house, some of the neighbors came out to see what the commotion was about, and this included some kids who went to the same school as Cole and me. A few of them were even in our 6th grade class. It was during that time that the three of us realized that we'd never had the chance to get dressed. Because of that, we had to stand outside, in full view of everyone, in just our briefs for what seemed like forever. When we went back to school on Monday, Cole and I had to put up with more than a bit of snickering, stares, and ribbing. That went on for the next few weeks until school ended for the summer. I'm 29 now, but when I was 16, my parents went out for the evening and left me home alone. it wasn't unusual. They trusted me enough by that point, and I was a pretty responsible kid for my age. I'd usually just stay in my room, watch TV, or work on homework until they got back. That night, they were going to dinner with some friends downtown. I remember my mom telling me they probably wouldn't be back until around 11, and it was only a little after 8 when everything started. Our house wasn't exactly a mansion, but it wasn't small either. It was a 2-story in a quiet suburban neighborhood that was at least middle class. The back of the house faced a row of trees that divided us from another street, and there was a sliding glass door that opened onto a small deck. My parents never worried much about it, but I always thought the lock looked flimsy. The upstairs had 3 bedrooms, and mine was at the far end of the hall. My window overlooked the backyard, and from there I could see most of the deck. I was at my desk going through some math homework when I heard the faint sound of the back door sliding open. It wasn't loud, but I noticed it right away because everything else in the house was quiet. I thought maybe my parents came home early. That didn't really make sense, but I didn't know what else it could have been. I set down my pencil, pushed back my chair, and headed downstairs. The staircase went right into the living room, and as I made my way down, I was starting to get nervous. I looked around when I reached the bottom, but the room was empty. The lamp in the corner cast just enough light to see across to the kitchen. The first thing I noticed was that the curtain covering the sliding door was pushed slightly aside. I walked over, and that was when I saw that the door was cracked open, and the lock had been forced. I wanted to believe that I was overreacting, but everything about it was wrong. My parents would never leave the door like that, and they definitely wouldn't have broken the lock. That's when panic really set in. I turned and bolted upstairs without thinking too much. The phone was on the nightstand in my room, and I was focused only on getting to it as fast as possible. But when I rounded the corner into my room, I stopped short. The closet door was shut, and I never left it that way. I always kept it open, partly because I hated the dark corners inside, and partly because I was lazy. I forced myself to grab the phone anyway, then I turned and ran straight back downstairs and out the front door without looking back. I sprinted across the yard to the neighbor's house. The Dennisons lived directly across the street, and I knew they were home because their lights were on. My legs felt weak by the time I reached their porch, and I was shaking so badly I could barely press the doorbell. Mrs. Dennison answered a moment later, and I must have looked terrified because she didn't ask many questions before pulling me inside. I tried to explain what happened, but my words came out jumbled at first. I told her someone was in my house and that the back door had been forced open. Mr. Dennison picked up their cordless phone right away and called the police while I sat down on their couch. I couldn't stop fidgeting, and I kept glancing at their front window like someone followed me. The police got there surprisingly fast, and they spoke with Mr. Dennison briefly, then came over to me. I told them everything exactly as it happened, and one of the officers asked if I was absolutely sure. I said yes. Then 2 of the police officers went to check my house while I waited on the porch. From there, I could just barely see my front door, and I could see the whole driveway. After what felt like forever, they came back out with a man in handcuffs. He looked disheveled, and probably on drugs. The police spoke to me again after the man was taken away. They told me he hadn't put up much of a fight, and they'd found a knife in his pocket. Hearing that made me feel sick all over again. My parents came home not long after everything was wrapped up. They pulled into the driveway, just as the last of the police cars was leaving. It took me a long time to feel comfortable in my room again. For weeks I slept with the hallway light on, and I always checked the closet before going to bed, even though I left it wide open. I hated closing it, and I still do. Even now, I almost always leave my closets open. I don't like to think about what would have happened if I didn't notice the closet. The thought of opening that door and finding a stranger crouched inside is something I can't really shake. The police told us the man was probably looking for valuables, and he'd broken in because our house was dark and seemed empty. They said I was lucky I noticed the door when I did. In the end, life went back to normal, but it never felt quite the same. My parents still live in that house, and whenever I visit, I notice the extra locks and the sturdy bar across the sliding door. I was in my late 20s when I moved in with 3 friends. I'd just gotten out of a relationship, and I couldn't afford my apartment anymore, so I had to do something. It was an old brick townhouse, and it sat on a narrow street a few blocks from downtown. The area wasn't terrible, it wasn't great either. The building itself had character, which was a nice way of saying that the floors creaked, the plumbing rattled, and the windows leaked in the winter. Rent was cheap enough that we ignored those problems, though. The place had 3 stories if you counted the attic, which was converted into a small bedroom. The rest of us split the larger bedrooms on the 2nd floor. The living room downstairs had mismatched couches that the guys picked up from Facebook Marketplace, and the kitchen was just big enough for 2 of us at a time. The 4 of us had been friends since college. Mark and I were roommates before, and we got along well. He was the calm one, usually too calm, like nothing ever fazed him. Then there was Sean, who was always the loudest voice in the room, the type of person who never left a conversation without making some kind of joke. He lived for an audience, which he usually found in us whether we wanted it or not. The last of us was Sam, the youngest by a year, who had a habit of staying up late and was always on his computer. The house felt busy most of the time, but it worked. No one was too difficult to live with, which is all you can really ask for in your 20s. That Friday night we were all home, which didn't happen often. Mark and Sean were downstairs in the living room watching a comedy show on TV, while Sam was in his room with his headphones on, probably playing a game. I was in my room on the 2nd floor, reading through job postings on my laptop. At around midnight, the house was quiet enough that I could hear the laughter from the TV drifting upstairs. I was about to turn in for the night when I heard the front door creak open. The sound was loud enough that it carried through the whole house. At first, Mark and Sean thought it was one of our friends dropping by, since people sometimes came over unannounced. But when they turned toward the entryway, there was a man standing there who they didn't know. He was tall, with messy hair, a dirty gray hoodie, and a knife in his hand. He just stood there staring at them. Mark later told me that for a few seconds, he wasn't sure if the guy was drunk, or if he even realized where he was. Then Sean shouted up the stairs for us to call the police, and that seemed to pull the man into motion. He stepped inside and gripped the knife tighter. I jumped up the second I heard Sean yell. When I looked down the stairs, I saw the man standing in the entryway, his shoes leaving faint smudges on the wood. My first thought was that this had to be some kind of joke, but the knife made it clear that it wasn't. Sam came out of his room at the same time, pulling off his headphones. He froze when he saw what was happening, and I whispered for him to call the police. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, which was a heavy glass lamp from my desk, and held it like a bat. My hands felt sweaty on the smooth glass. Downstairs, Mark and Sean bolted out the back door, which opened into our small yard. I heard the screen door slam shut as they ran. The man didn't chase them, though. Instead, he turned and looked up at me. The light from the lamp behind me must have made me stand out at the top of the stairs. He started walking up slowly, one step at a time, holding the knife out in front of him. His eyes didn't look wild or angry. They looked blank, which in some ways was worse. He didn't say a single word the whole time he was there. I ran down the hall and grabbed Sam by the arm. He just finished giving the cops our address. We ran into the attic room, slammed the door, and shoved a chair in front of it. Then we stood there listening. I could hear the slow creak of the stairs under his weight. Then it went quiet. I didn't know if he was standing still, or if he'd turned around. We waited there without moving, and we were barely breathing. After a few minutes, I heard voices from outside. Mark and Sean were yelling at the neighbors to call the police. We waited up there for a long 10 minutes before the cops finally got there. When we went down, the man was gone. The front door was still open, and it was swinging slightly from the breeze. The police searched the house, checking closets in the basement, but he wasn't there. They found dirty fingerprints on the doorknob and scuff marks halfway up the stairs. One of the officers said it looked like he climbed a few steps, stopped, and then left. He thought the man chose the house at random and hadn't expected 4 people inside. The police stayed for over an hour. Then they checked the yard and the alley behind the house, but didn't find him. The officer who seemed to be in charge told us bluntly that people like that usually weren't caught unless they were repeat offenders and someone identified them later. He reminded us that the door was unlocked when the man came in, and he made it clear we shouldn't make that mistake again. We agreed, but none of us really needed convincing. When the police finally left, we all sat in the living room because no one felt like going back to bed. The next morning, I went to the hardware store and bought new locks, a deadbolt, and a security bar for the back door. We also picked up a cheap motion light for the yard. That night was the last time any of us ever brushed off the habit of locking the door. It only took a crazy guy with a knife to prove how important it really is. Last week, I was sitting home on my living room couch watching TV, and I wanted to see which movies were playing on each channel. One of the movies that was playing was Home Alone, so I decided to click on the channel, and I started watching it. Let's skip to the part where Harry and Marv burgle the McAllisters' home. A really strange coincidence happened at that scene. If you haven't seen the first Home Alone movie, this is a spoiler warning, so if you want to watch the movie, then I'd suggest leaving this video, or skip to the next story. At the part where Marv walks into the house with a crowbar, I heard the window right next to me shatter. I turned my head swiftly, and I saw a person wearing all black. He had a mask on, and I could tell that he had a very angry expression on his face through the mask. He rushed inside to try and get to me, but before I could even move, I felt a strong set of arms being wrapped around my neck. I couldn't even speak, and I had trouble breathing. This person was literally trying to subdue me. It wasn't the one who was at my window, because I was looking at him when I first started getting choked. I felt defenseless, but I had to think fast, so what I did was an old-school karate move that I knew. I elbowed the person behind me in their chest, which made him release his arms around my neck. As soon as he did that, I ran really fast, just like Sonic. Then I unlocked the front door and ran straight outside onto the street with my pajamas and socks on. The whole time, I heard footsteps behind me, but I didn't dare to turn around. It's a good thing I was on my high school track team growing up, because I managed to outrun them, and they were pretty fast. I hid behind a tree for 20 minutes, and then I felt it was safe to go back to my house. I got back, but this time I was careful. Then I grabbed my cell phone and called the police, and they got there pretty fast. They searched the house and the area to see if the thieves were anywhere close by, but their search turned up nothing. Afterwards, I gave them the timeline of the story, and after that, they put police tape outside of the broken window. First thing in the morning, I called a window repair service. They fixed my window in only 2 to 3 hours on that same day. Over the next few weeks, I plan on installing a doorbell camera and also installing an alarm system. I saved a lot over years of working after college, and I plan to keep doing that. I don't ever waste my money on stupid things, because I like to be smart with it. This story just shows how a scary scene in a movie can creepily play out the same way in real life, and at the same exact time.